Today, the toy aisles seem to be changing quicker than ever. There's more turnovers, there's more spot checks, there's more shifting. I mean, we've seen this at both Walmart and Target, now that Toys R Us has gone the big A way, where even some of the Funko Pop and collector products are starting to edge its way into the action figure aisle proper. Now, one brand that I get a lot of questions about on this channel is G.I. Joe. Well, I've never worked on G.I. Joe, and I'm personally not a huge G.I. Joe fan. I'm a moderate G.I. Joe fan. It's not my favorite, but I don't dislike it. But fans have been asking me why it's so hard to find new G.I. Joe product. Well, there's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, obviously, the increase in prices has caused a lot of brands to ship fewer product to retail because demand does go down with kids and parents. But with G.I. Joe in particular, and I did an interview with Bobby Valla, who's a former G.I. Joe brand designer at Hasbro. He now does Valverse. We did a video where he talked about how since G.I. Joe is owned by Hasbro, they don't have to pay a royalty, so they can put less value in the product. Now, obviously, this is a little controversial, and there was even some talk about taking this video down to kind of appease Hasbro that wasn't really happy that Bobby was highlighting this. But much like She-Hulk's boyfriends, Bobby is now ghosting me, so I feel like I can promote the video because, well, I don't need to do any favors for somebody who's a grown adult who's ghosting me. All right, so definitely check out that video. It'll be linked at the end. It's important because when looking at IP that is owned by a company, obviously without them having to pay royalties, yes, they could put more value into the product, and that's kind of where knowing the battle is important, because everything about getting a product to the toy shelf these days is about content. And while G.I. Joe may have the benefit of being owned by Hasbro and the advantage of not having to pay royalties, it has the disadvantage of a lack of current content. I mean, yes, there have been some new G.I. Joe movies, and they've had their pluses and minuses. I mean, I remember the first G.I. Joe movie had ninjas with jetpacks. I mean, how cool is that? Plus, redheads and tight armor. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. Well, the movies have done okay. We can't exactly say they're huge runaway hits, much like Transformers is, and a big part of that is because Transformers plays so well overseas, whereas G.I. Joe does kind of have that U.S. Army feel to it. I mean, of all the G.I. Joe content movies out there, really the animated one from the 80s is kind of the most beloved and has actually done the best financially. Well, I guess that's what happens when, you make a cartoon in the 80s. So, with content being king, you have to see the relationship between that and toy product. And this isn't something new. This has been something that's existed since the emergence of modern toys in the 40s and 50s when we started getting plastic as opposed to wood and metal toys. So something like Howdy Doody, which was huge in the 1950s, obviously spawned a toy line, and kids wanted to have their own Howdy Doody at home to play out the adventures or to have him, battle your wood toys. This was also an issue that continued throughout the 60s when the U.S. government actually cracked down on children's programming, things like Romper Room that had their own set of product they were promoting in the content. And the FCC basically was like, whoa, you can't do that because kids can't always tell the difference between a show and a commercial. And that's why it was heavily regulated. So Romper Room's product, like their bee, had to get promoted off the show and not on the show. Fast forward to the 1970s, and obviously studios and toy makers are still looking for a partnership to bring the latest in, screen entertainment to kids' basements and playrooms, and things like Planet of the Apes was a big hit, mostly because it had movie after movie after movie. But when you have something like Star Wars, which was brand new and untested, I've made a few videos before, and I think it's pretty common knowledge that nobody wanted to touch Star Wars. I mean, Lucasfilm had to basically beg Kenner to take the license at the end of the day. Hasbro, Mattel, they all turned it down. And a big part of that was because, well, it was a completely unknown property, and no property had really ever succeeded without constant content. Even the prelim artwork looked really funky, and people were like, how do you make this into toys? I mean, is someone going to want to play with a giant bear and Well, obviously, fast forward today, and Star Wars has more merchandise than probably any other brand. And a big reason for that is because it came out on the cusp of home viewership. So in the 60s and 70s, you were reliant on basically either owning a home projector or going to the movies and seeing a first-run film, or a lot of times there would be re-releases. I mean, 101 Dalmatians, I think, was re-released something like 20 times. I don't know, go Google it. But without re-releases and without a home projector, it took until the VCR in the mid-'80s before we truly had home viewership of content. And that was why so many brands in the 80s took off because, well, you could watch it over and over again. So, that is exactly why a contemporary brand like Masters of the Universe, which hangs, half a foot down from G.I. Joe, is successful right now at retail. They both grew up in the 80s, but Masters of the Universe, aka He-Man, has multiple new TV shows out. They have multiple shows on Netflix. And this opens the gate for children to get into the brand. G.I. Joe doesn't have this. Yes, they've had movies, they have collector product, which of course sells well on the collector wall, that's way behind electronics, but this is a much lower velocity requirement. It doesn't really appeal to kids, and well, to call it what it is, it's kind of fading and shrinking. You'll notice that what was almost 18 feet is now almost less than 6 feet of space, and the signage is gone. So, yeah, the whole day of, the child bringing their mom, dad into the action figure aisle and begging them for a toy, that all spawns from them watching content. Yeah, they might be inspired by something they see on shelf that may, be amazing, but otherwise, it's an eternal struggle to get a child interested in a toy product without content. And that's exactly the problem that G.I. Joe has right now. There is no content. Yeah, I know, there's some modern movies, but there's no constant binge-worthy animated series aimed at children that's going to get them into the brand. And because of that, stores are ordering less, and therefore collectors are having a harder time finding the newest figures coming out, and things are starting to peg warm. Because this brand skews very heavy to the adult collector, simply because kids aren't exposed to it. I hope this video offered a little insight into why G.I. Joe Classified is a little bit harder to find at retail, and do check out the video linked below where I interview Bobby Val, and he makes some great points about the added value that G.I. Joe could have because it doesn't have to pay a royalty since it's owned by Hasbro. So check out that video, check out other videos, share this one. It's the best way to show support for this channel. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.